All right. Hi to the people who are here. Thank you so much for coming to this event to celebrate Tracy Swinton Bailey, PhD's new book, Forever Free. My name is Ariel, and I am a bookseller at Women and Children First. I'm hosting this event today. I'm going to go through a couple of things with y'all real quick. I'm going to do a quick land acknowledgement as well. We begin our virtual events as we begin our events in the store with a land acknowledgement. So please join me in acknowledging that the land which the bookstore stands is the occupied, unceded territory of the Peoria, Potawatomi, and Miami people. There are over 75,000 Indigenous people living in Illinois, and we strive to recognize and honor Native history, literature, and community. We encourage you to learn more about land acknowledgements and about the rightful owners of the land where you are viewing tonight's event. And if you happen to be in Chicago, I highly recommend checking out Shy Nations Youth Council and their garden because it is incredible and you learn a whole lot about indigenous gardening and just everything. And also check out Stop Line 3 in Defense where you are if you have not yet. Again, I'm Ariel from Women and Children First. We're going to be talking about Forever Free. If you are interested in purchasing the book and you haven't yet, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little green button that says buy the book, and that you can click and you can purchase the book directly from our store. I always say purchase it, if not from us, from another independent bookseller because Amazon can kick rocks. If you have a question for the lovely Tracy, I definitely recommend hitting at the bottom of the screen. There's a button that says ask a question, and you can put that question in. It comes up as anonymous. I highly recommend putting in the questions. It's a very intelligent Black woman, and I'm sure she has a lot to share with you. So please ask questions. If you don't ask questions, I will, and I'm sure you do not want to hear my voice all night. So ask your questions. I'm going to read Tracy's bio very quickly. Tracy Swinton Bailey earned a PhD in education with a specialization in language and literacy at the University of South Carolina in 2013. She began her career as a high school English teacher and went on to found Freedom Readers, an after-school and summer literacy program that was designed and implemented to support families in low-income areas and assist children in achieving their academic goals in reading. She is married to award-winning writer Isaac J. Bailey and is the mother of 2 children. Thank you so much, Tracy, for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ariel. It's such a pleasure to be here and a privilege to meet you and be with all of everyone who's in the audience tonight. I'd like to start my comments by reading to you a little bit from the book, Forever Free. When Ariel introduced me, she put emphasis on the fact that my name is Tracy Swinton Bailey, PhD. And I'm going to read to you from chapter 3 of the book that talks a little bit about how I came to be a PhD. When PhDs tell the story of the day they defended their dissertation, there is usually a happy ending. Some talk about the long, grueling hours they invested in research, reading books, and conducting interviews. But the conversation inevitably turns to triumph, that feeling of having run a marathon and hitting wall after wall, only to finally cross the finish line with your last ounce of energy. I've completed 2 full marathons. The metaphor is apt, but my story is different. My story takes a turn that most do not. If we further the analogy of the marathon runner, what happened in my case is more like the athlete who reaches mile 25 in a 26.2 mile race, only to be pushed to the ground by some unstable onlooker who jumps out from the sidelines. Instead of being congratulated for reaching the pinnacle of my educational journey, I was told that I had failed. For reasons I struggle to fully comprehend to this day, I was allowed to graduate only after being told that I would not, and watching a lifelong dream shatter like glass. As with all long races, This story starts long before the day I stood in front of my committee. 12 years earlier, a defining moment prepared me for the road ahead. Shannon and I sat together on the couch in her living room looking over assignments. In order to satisfy the state's diploma requirements, the school assigned a certified teacher to deliver what it termed homebound instruction. Like clockwork, I'd show up 2 times a week to discuss with Shannon what her classroom teachers told me she should know and do. It helped that I had been one of her teachers before we both left the high school on maternity leave. She had been enrolled in my 9th grade English class. A year later, we sat in her living room with her son and a baby carrier next to our feet, while back at home with my husband, my son jumped in his bouncy chair. The mobile home park where Shannon lived with her mother and 2 brothers wasn't far from my neighborhood. Shannon was always waiting for me, inviting me in with a warm smile. She told me that day that her mother was gone to work and that her teenage brothers would probably be coming in and out. She always turned the television off when I arrived so that we could concentrate on the lessons I brought with me. I was jotting down questions for her math teacher when I heard a loud crash coming from the back of the trailer. "It's just my brothers," she told me before reaching down to replace the pacifier in her son's mouth. "They're always getting into it." It wasn't the first time I'd heard them argue. There seemed to be a constant tension between the 2 boys. Shannon and I tried to ignore them, doing our best to stay focused on her lessons. The second loud noise was the older brother crashing into the wall of the living room before he slid down to the floor. In seconds, the younger teen stood over him yelling in a loud voice, threatening to kick him in the side. "Hey, you guys cut it out. Cut it out. Can't you see me trying to get my schoolwork done?" I could tell that Shannon, now 16, had been in this situation before. The room felt as if it were shrinking around me as the older boy got up and charged his brother with the handle of a broom, catching him across the forearm with a blow that made a loud popping sound. The offended brother screamed, got a knife from the kitchen, and held it in his hand for a few seconds with a look in his eyes that said everything I needed to know. By this time, the baby was screaming. Shannon was also screaming and threatening to call her mom at work. I could feel a vein in my neck pulsing, the one that goes haywire when I get scared. "I'm sorry, Shannon. I can't do this." I placed my notepad into my black school bag and headed toward the door. I asked the school to find another instructor for Shannon that day, and I looked for another job. But I never forgot that family and the issues with which they wrestled. I think about Shannon often, the way she managed her household while her mother was away, while learning to be a mother herself. The way she took control and talked her brothers down while I prepared to leave. I did not detect one trace of victimhood or even fear in the set of her shoulders or the steel of her voice. Instead, I observed determination, agency, a certainty that education would offer her the best chance at a better life. At the time, I didn't have the capacity to provide all that Shannon needed, but she inspires me every day to reach out to girls like her, to use all I've gained to light a path for them. 12 years later, I sat in a book-lined room in Wardlaw Hall with the 4 members of my dissertation committee. I was asked to make a presentation that day on the research study that I had conducted in a low-income community where Freedom Readers was serving children in grades kindergarten through 5. I was nervous, but confident that I had listened carefully and responded to all of my professors' suggestions and guidance. I continued to listen as they detailed the weaknesses of my work. They pointed out the ways in which they thought my writing showed an unfamiliarity with life in low-income areas. They said that I didn't understand that such families had value on their own and that they didn't need me to come in and fix them. They told me they got the sense that I didn't believe those families were good enough, that I was trying to change them fundamentally. I had expected some pushback. No dissertation is perfect, and I'll be the first one to admit that I didn't know what I was doing. That's why I leaned on my advisor's direction so heavily. I asked her to make the expectations clear, and I believe that she had. I studied each one of those expectations as they were spelled out to me and made sure that her approval was granted. I was meticulous in this regard because the mere attempt at writing a dissertation was a monumental risk, one few people I knew personally had dared to take. So I wasn't surprised when committee members started a list of what I needed to revise. My advisor had prepared me for that part, but I didn't expect to hear that my attempt to defend my work had failed, that I would not be permitted to walk out that door on that day having earned a PhD. To be honest, what happened in that room defies logic, both in my mind and the minds of the committee members. When I reached out to the two I could find when I started working on this book 7 years later, they admitted that they didn't remember the meeting, and the details, the way I explained them, didn't make sense at all. I couldn't agree more. So I will leave it there and allow you to pick up the book and find out what happened in the rest of that committee meeting. I do have a couple of books that I'd like to share with you from the actual Freedom Readers program, because the book does talk about a lot about the work that I do with young people. So it's called A Memoir and a Call to Action. The memoir part is the part where I talk about my own life, where I talk about remembering being surrounded by books when I was very, very young, remembering my father being the one who went out and got those books for me. It talks about how I love to read Dr. Seuss books and Berenstain Bears books. And there was a book called Lovable Lyle that I read just about every day. And my favorite book was a book that I think it was called There's a Monster at the End of This Book. And the furry monster Grover, the Sesame Street monster, would continually tell the reader, please don't turn the page. He'd build brick walls so you wouldn't turn the page. He'd use ropes so you wouldn't turn the page. And then when you got to the end of the book, you found that he was the monster that he was afraid of. And that book cracked me up every time I read it. I just love the humor in it. I love the anticipation and the foreshadowing. And I'd always ask my dad to read that book for me again. I wasn't necessarily surrounded at that time by a lot of books by authors of color or that featured children of color. But at Freedom Readers Today, we do get the opportunity to share those kinds of books. The first book I want to share with you is a book that's called Bunheads. It's by Misty Copeland. And I love sharing this book with young people because it reminds me a little bit of the way that I picked up words when I was a little girl. Misty uses a lot of words and phrases in this book that ballerinas would know, but words that I came across for the very first time in this book. And I actually went to a website and I went to Netflix to watch Misty read this book so that I could hear her pronounce those words. And when I was a little girl growing up in church, the choir would be singing a song and I'd be following along in my hymnal. And that's where I learned to pronounce a lot of the words that I didn't know how to pronounce. I could make a connection between what I was hearing and what I was seeing on the page. And that research tells us that that's one of the ways that we can build literacy development in young people. So at Freedom Readers, we start all of our meetings with a theme song. And that theme song is either going to have the words on a page in a booklet or we flash the words on a screen so that those young people will also have the opportunity to make a connection between what they're hearing and what they're seeing. The second book I want to share with you is a book called I Love My Hair by Natasha Anastasia Tarpley. and with illustrations by E.B. Lewis. And so we love to read books that reflect the young people with whom we work and also expose the young people in our program who don't necessarily have hair like this to a celebration of Black hair and all things related to the culture. And so we love having the opportunity to instill a great sense of pride and empowerment in all of the young people that visit our program. Another book that does that is called Hair Love. And this is a book by Matthew Cherry, illustrated by Vashti Harrison. I love this particular book because it actually reminds me of the times when I would read with my dad when I was younger. But in this book, this father figures out how to fix his little girl's hair. And they have a great journey doing it. And I think it's just a beautiful expression of the love that's shared between fathers and daughters. And finally, the last book that I'll show you right now is a book called Silwe by Lupita Nyong'o. And I also went to my Netflix. If you haven't checked this out, there's a great series on Netflix called Bookmarks with several African American authors reading their children's books out loud. And so one of the things that we advocate is reading aloud because it's so important for young people to hear our voices in their heads as they begin to build their fluency on their own as they become independent readers. Again, this book is illustrated by Vashti Harrison. The pictures in this book are tremendous. And I love the story of a little girl coming to terms with how she looks and how the world sees her. It kind of takes me back a little bit to a quote by Du Bois that I mentioned in Forever Free about double consciousness. We think about how we are being seen and we think about how we see ourselves. And in this book, this little girl discovers that beauty is something that's on the inside. So Freedom Readers is a place where we share books, where we give kids the opportunity to practice what they're learning in school about reading, and we give them lots of choices about what they want to read because we know that's extremely important. At the very end of our time together, we give the young people an opportunity to grow their public speaking skills. That's another thing that I had the privilege and the honor of doing when I was a little girl growing up in the church. Every year I had to say an Easter speech. So by doing that, I learned the confidence that it takes to kind of stand up in front of a group of people and deliver a speech. My parents were so very adamant that each year I'd learn a speech and I'd recite it in front of the church. And as I grew older, the speeches grew longer. And so one thing that I wished would happen when I was a little girl is that I really wish that my teachers at my school understood how important literacy was to my parents and how important it was in my community. And I really think that that knowledge, that connection, that understanding would have really made my education a lot more rich, a lot more full, and just a lot more complete. So with that, I will invite Ariel to come back in and we will answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, and thank you for reading. Again, everyone, if you have a question, you can hit the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen and enter it. I don't see any yet, so I'll go ahead and ask some questions. But if you have any at all, don't hesitate to put it in there. And if you can't figure out that button, that's also fine. You can just put it in the chat, and I mean, then we'll all see it, and then that's also fine. And we'll just pretend that we don't know who asked it. So thank you again for reading. I like this. I love reading about specifically like youth and education. Like you brought up
Mhm.
savage inequalities in your book, and I remember reading that book and it changing my life as well, and just the way that we think of like our education system.
Mhm.
um and he wrote it so long ago, you know, that what was it, the 90s? So I wonder, like, from the time that uh Cazal was writing Savage Inequalities to when you wrote this, like, how do you think that the education system has changed? Like, has it changed for the better? Like, do you think that there is more work that's being put into our youth and like trying to bridge those inequalities, or do you think that that gap has widened?
I really love that question, Ariel. I'm very glad that you asked it. When just your asking of that question and the way that you framed it and your reference to Jonathan Kozol's work reminded me a little bit of the way I feel about Frederick Douglass's writing, that he wrote it so long ago, but it's so relevant to what we're talking about today. It is mind blowing. We've made so much progress, yet we have such a long way to go. And that's exactly how I feel about the difference or the distance between the work that Kozel was doing and the observations that he made and the observations that I am making now. There's so much work to do. The gaps are widening, especially as we look at the impact of the pandemic on communities of color and low income communities. And so I'll just talk about one particular instance or one illustration that I can think of. I know that there are a lot of middle class or wealthy families that got together to form these learning pods, right? And so you would have 3 or 4 families in a neighborhood. They would maybe have one parent teaching several children, doing reading activities and writing and math. But there were the majority of families in low income communities that just simply did not have that same opportunity because lots of families had people in them that had to work. So pulling together that kind of a pod was just simply an advantage, a privilege in those particular neighborhoods. And so I think what we have to do in our schools is we have to take a second look at who is benefiting the most from our educational system, why that's the case, and what we need to do to make sure everybody walks away with the kind of education that's going to help them reach their goals.
So thinking on like from your experience with freedom readers, like how do you think that's something that we could do today? Like what steps would people take? Like, does that make sense? Or should I ask
Yes.
more? Okay.
No, no, that makes absolute sense. If nothing else comes out of the reading and discussion of this book that I wrote, I hope that more people will understand that education, especially literacy education, is a responsibility of the community. We can't necessarily sit there and expect the school to meet the needs of all of the children there because we've got so much evidence, so many statistics showing us that it's just absolutely not happening. And so we have to take matters into our own hands, and we have to do what we did years ago when my parents were growing up, each one, reach one, right? If we find ourselves in a situation where we've benefited from a good education, I think we need to look at it as a moral responsibility to reach out to another child and make sure that they have all of those opportunities as well. And for me, that's why the Freedom Readers work is so important. And so I would encourage people who have um, just the desire to see that happen, to pull kids together in libraries, if you have space in your bookstore, in community centers, in churches, in all these places where education has always been so important in the Black community, we can't let that die. We've got to circle back to that because the need is so great. and because our children are really slipping through the cracks. And we can't let it happen. We have to get to them, and we have to find out what is that thing that we can do to spark that interest in them. Because once the flame is sparked, then it's very difficult to extinguish it. But we've got to find that connection between that one child and that one book, and it will change the game completely.
I love that so much because it makes me think about, you talk about radical care, you talk about like the ways in which we have to like build that community, and it because it's I think about the pandemic a lot with like educating how it has like further isolated us, right? And that
Right,
is so scary because it's like these all these kids who don't have, like, I mean, here in Chicago we had, when the pandemic started and we went into virtual learning, and so many kids that didn't even have internet access at home, which is,
right,
people completely forget that a lot of people do not have that that's not normal for a lot of people in this country, and
right.
who just are completely left out. And so this thing of you, I would love to hear you say more about radical care and like
Oh,
where you got that from and how you are living it.
yeah, yeah. So I think radical care is a term that I kind of came up with to describe what it means to be able to walk next to a person in need, offer help to that person without feeling as if you're fixing them, or without feeling as if the person needing help is on this level and you're up here. Sometimes when we talk about charity, we talk about being able to come in on our white horse and just bring all these resources and bring all these wonderful things, because we need to uh, sometimes we fall into the sense of superiority. But radical care is about something that I heard Brian Stevenson say at some point, that we're all broken on some level. We all have something that we need to fix. And so getting back to our humanity and our humility and reaching out to another person with the intention of just lifting them up, because we know that we're going to need that same lifting at some point. That's what radical care is all about. And that's what my parents talked to me about. That was what ruled the day in their community when they were growing up. It was that radical care. So it wasn't just about books and learning, but it was about, if I had a garden and I grew some okra and I picked a bucket of okras, then we had okra in the freezer, but you also had okra in your freezer, because we're going to leave a bucket on your front porch just so that you can have it. If I'm shelling some butter beans and I've got about 5 bags in my freezer, then you have 3 in your freezer as well. It just kind of went without saying. It wasn't something that we talked about. It was just something that just was a part of breathing the air in our community. It was the same way in the church. Everybody took care of that building because they knew that it belonged to that community, right? And we took care of one another. If there was someone who was sick, or somebody who just was going through a hard time, you visited with them. You offered them the kind of support that they needed. You cooked a pan of macaroni when somebody passed away, right? And you took that to the house and you sat with the family. So that kind of radical care, I think, is missing from our educational system. And it's missing from a lot of our nonprofits that are working to make our communities better, when we are not necessarily seeing eye to eye, but we're seeing people who want to come in from the outside with a solution, when that kind of solution, that radical care, is at the heart of who we are as people, right? So I think that we just need to take some time to get back to that.
Like, yes. It makes me, it's like, have you ever, I'm sure you have, that because you talk about Du Bois, you talk about Frederick Douglass, Ella Baker, that was something that she talked about a lot too. Like during the civil rights movement, or like as she was, as usual, Black women building everything and nobody knows who they are. But Ella Baker building up that movement and like saying
Yeah,
like, you are smart, sure. You have a college education, sure. You are not smarter than these poor black people that have literally been living in the racist South, and you both have things to teach each other. And
Yeah,
whereas like you might be able to teach them, like help their reading comprehension better and really break down theory, they're going to be able to teach you how to live in these streets and how to
yeah,
survive and how to fight. And it's like, I think that that's what I think about with radical care and what you're talking about with radical care. And I love that you bring it back to like, um, like just kind of like what black people already do in community when we are allowed to have
mhm,
community and when we have it as of just taking care of each other. It makes me think of my big mama. It makes me think of like growing up in the church and how natural that was. And like that's what we have to get back to. And
right.
it's as opposed to like creating all these new systems and of like heroes and such. So I love that. I do see one question real quick, and but
Okay.
before I do get to, I see this question, we will ask it. Before we get to that, I want to ask you on so with uh how would you say that when you're working with these students, like that's obviously really heavy, like you're working with people who are like, even the piece you just read or the chapter that you just, or the part of the chapter that you just read, like working
Mhm.
with people that are living lives that are just not you don't see on TV in a way that's not romanticized or made to look even more like victimizing,
Right.
which we even say in the book. And so it's like, how do you go into that? How do you steel yourself to work with people and to do this actual radical care?
Mhm. So, to answer that question, I'm going to circle back to the last topic that we talked about for a minute. And so, what I love about this Freedom Readers work is that I think that a lot of people in our community understand the importance of literacy, right? They understand that if a child doesn't read well by the time they're in third grade, then they're more likely to end up dropping out of high school. Lots of people get that intellectually. So, because of that, we're able to cross racial lines, religious lines, lots of different barriers that may have separated us. People are willing to cross those lines in order to sit with those kids. But we have to begin having those conversations about radical care because not everybody comes to the table with the same intention and with the same mindset. The thing that steals me, the thing that inspires me, the thing that keeps me so encouraged is number one, these people who decide to set aside this 90 minutes a week, put aside their cell phone, walk away from their law practice, walk away from the clergy, walk away from their from whatever it is that they're doing to focus on that one child. So that inspires me every time I see them walk through the door. The second thing that inspires me and steals me is the children themselves. So when they get up to make these speeches, in the very beginning, they're so nervous. So imagine a 5-year-old standing up in front of a group of 40 people trying to make a speech for the first time, right? So I can remember this one little boy, he would turn his back to the audience and make his speech to the wall. He did that for 7 weeks. On the 8th week of our meeting, he turned around and made his speech to the room, and there was not a dry eye in the room because we could see that he had transformed. So it's moments like that that keep me coming back. It's the mamas who call me and say, I'm seeing my child pick up a book instead of going to the video game. For the very first time, I didn't know that they could do that. Or when will you guys be back? Because these books that we have at home, I mean, they're reading to me all the time, and we want another book by another author like this. It's just the energy of being there in that room. Everybody who is there wants to be there, and they're just excited. We build it in a way that the energy is just positive, and we focus on what each child can do well, and we build on that week after week. So yeah, you're right, it's heavy, But in that moment, we create a safe space for everybody to find what it is that just brings them joy.
I love that. Oh, I love that. I love the story of the little boy. That's so, oh, yeah, I want to cry now. I love kids. Um, so there is a question, and I know you shared some earlier, but the person asked, do you have some favorite young adult books, also grades 4 and 5? Do we mean fourth and fifth grade, or do we mean age 4 and 5? Maybe that person can clarify that.
So age 4 and 5, we would definitely maybe look at some picture books without words for the younger kids, age 4 and 5. Um, I know it's important to read to kids from the time that they're infants before they can talk. We read to our kids before they were born. So that's extremely important. Did you get clarification on the question?
Yes, they said ages 9 and 10. So grades 4 and 5, ages 9 and 10.
Okay, great. I'm just going to throw up. I'm going to throw up about 3 or 4 more picture books because I've got my stack right over here, and some of these are new to me, and some of these are old time favorites. I will have to say that when you look at some of these books, you can read the back, and it will tell you kind of who it's targeted for. But we try to make sure that we give the kids at Freedom Readers lots of choice. So if you're interested in dinosaurs, and you want to learn about Tyrannosaurus Rex, and you can't necessarily read that word yet, then that's why you have a person sitting next to you who will read to you about Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? And even if you are in fourth, fifth grade, I highly recommend these picture books. These are a great place to start. A lot of the adults in our program tell us that the content of these books spark such great conversations that they just really they get into deep discussions, and the comprehension here is really deep as well. So I would recommend, even for fourth and fifth graders, taking a look at some of these picture books. So this one is called Kala Mata's Kitchen. And this young woman is Indian American, this little girl. And she had taken a trip to India, and it talks about the kinds of foods that she'd eaten there. She wants to be a chef. So it's the spices and the ingredients and all these good things. This one we kind of share along with our conversations about the kinds of jobs that you can have when you're older, but it's also great exposure to a different culture and a different way of seeing things. So this one I really love. I love this book because although I have not yet seen the Jennifer Hudson Aretha Franklin movie in the theater, I definitely want to. RESPECT, Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. So we love to find books that help us connect to what's going on currently around us. A couple of years ago, we took a look at the book Hidden Figures, and kids really liked that. We watched excerpts from the movie. And so if you have a child who is interested in music, to read this book together and then listen to the Queen of Soul, just sit and listen to I'm maybe not Natural Woman, but that's one of my favorite songs. I don't know. Maybe just listen to this song, Respect, and get a better understanding of who she was as an artist and why she was so great. The last one I'm going to share, and again, I think all of these would be appropriate for your 9, 10-year-old, fourth, fifth grader. This book is called I Am a Kindness Hero. And as you journey throughout this book, it talks about the different ways that you can be kind and the different ways that you can express that in your neighborhood, at home, and in your community. I Am a Kindness Hero. It's called by Jennifer Adams and illustrated by Carmi Lemonskates. So there are some other options for you if you're interested in those. So those are some of my favorites.
And We have all of those too. If anybody wants to stop by Women and Children First, but you should probably grab this book first before you grab those. I don't know, just to prepare you for what you want to read. So then, what is the process when you work with the kids? Like, how do y'all start? Like when they first, like that 5-year-old before that, as that first week of that 7 weeks. how
Hmm.
did how does it go?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you that in the very beginning, we just went door to door in the public housing community. We knocked on doors and told people what we were doing and invited them to take part. We signed them up, first come, first serve. Lots of people said to us, is this a remedial reading program? Is this a reading program for kids who aren't reading well? Because that is the lens that we take into literacy when we're talking about students of color in the school system. That is not the lens that we use for our program. We set up shop in low income communities because we know that there are many barriers and obstacles that those families have to deal with and they have to overcome. A lot of the kids are reading way above grade level, and the tutors look at me and they're like, really, what are we doing here? What we're doing here is providing that space for those kids so that they know that we can stay on this path even when it gets difficult. We're supporting them and we're surrounding them with that radical care. So we get the kids into the building, or right now we're operating virtually. We connect tutors with scholars online the way we are connecting right now. And we start out with something called an interest inventory. And that's where we find out more about the child. We're able to kind of just receive who they are. They tell us about their favorite sports and what they like to do outside of school and their favorite singer and their favorite song. And we take all of this information and we go through our libraries and try to find the books that we think are going to be a good match for those kids, right? Because I think it's extremely important that we put the time into, number one, letting the kids tell us what they want, and number two, giving them the kinds of choices that will be fruitful for them. Sometimes kids become overwhelmed when they have too many choices. But if we can get 3 to 5 books that might fit within their interest zone, then I think that that works well. Once we do that, then we connect a tutor with a scholar. We try to look at temperaments. We try to look at whether or not the tutor likes to work with a child that's just learning how to read, or a child who's practicing on learning how to read. And then they come to us and they do those theme songs in the beginning. We have conversations around particular themes. We will have a healthy snack. And then we go for 45 minutes. We sit together and we read together. We prepare our speech, give our speech. And I'm excited about the fact that when the kids walk out the door, everybody's picking up a brand new book for their home library. So that's how it goes.
Oh my gosh, I love it. And so what it like and in your work, and then I mean, obviously you've written a lot of your story in this book. Uh, but like, what do you really like? What else do you really want to like pull from this, like in that experience and the work that you have done, that you just really want to share before we get out of here? Because we've got like 15 minutes, which that's a good amount of time. But I just want to make sure. What is it that you would
Yeah.
love to share?
Well, here's one thing that I'm thinking about, that we've been around for about 11 years now, and here, this is what I believe is the next frontier for this kind of work that we're doing. We have the opportunity, the privilege, the honor to sit with children and their families in their communities. We also have the opportunity to take what we're learning from these interest inventories and build curricula that kind of reflects what we feel like our young people need to know. And so we really, I think, in the future, will focus more of our energy and our attention on telling those stories that haven't been told up to this point. The stories that reflect the resilience of our people, the brilliance of our people, and those stories that kind of have been hidden away from the world. For instance, I'm thinking about Tulsa, Oklahoma. It took us 100 years to get to the point where the entire nation is able to embrace the fact that this thing happened, right? And we're now able to grapple with that, heal those wounds, and then move forward. So, in order for us to give our kids more of a voice, to teach them what social justice is all about, to prepare them to be the next generation of change, we've got to be courageous about telling those stories. And I'm not sure that our textbooks are ready to make that sharp return in such short a time. So that is what my work is going to be going forward, telling those very important stories that empower and inspire and just really celebrate.
It makes me think of how you are preparing kids to be like you when you were in school, as you talk about like teaching the teacher and like coming in because they're not going to be talking about what is actual. Like you're like, oh, by the way, Columbus did not discover America, and then they go in class and they learn about Columbus, and I don't know, that's pretty funny. I don't. So yeah, so okay, so one thing you talk a lot about Frederick Douglass, like he is the
Right.
example that you use of somebody who like their entire lives were changed because of
Mhm.
literacy.
Yeah.
Um, and how did you get to Frederick? Like, what brought you there? Like, to specifically just write about him? Um, like, did you find like did you see yourself in him and his story a little?
Well, let me tell you how I came to him in the beginning. I, ever since I was in high school, I've been a collector of quotes. I love quotes. I will just keep them in a binder. They just little quick tidbits that can kind of really change the way that you think about things. And so I started coming across some of these Frederick Douglass quotes. And when I read the one where he says, once you learn to read, you are forever free, it kind of really changed the game for me. So that's how we have the title of the book, Forever Free. That's how we have the title of the program, Freedom Readers. It's all because of what Douglass kind of went through. So I read his autobiography, and this past year, I read David Blight's biography of Frederick Douglass, which I think was about 1,000 pages long. But I enjoyed it because I got to get more of a deep insight into who he was as a person. I mean, to think of someone he was actually enslaved, but once he learned how to read, he understood that he was being transformed. And here's another quote from Douglass that I love. He says, knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave, right? And so that if we can really open these windows and these doors of knowledge, then more of our children, more of the people around us will understand that, some of these systems of oppression, they don't belong to us. That's not how we're supposed to operate. And so that's how we get motivated to change all of that, to turn it around. That's how our agency is born. That's how our eyes are open. The one thing he did say is that after he learned to read and he gained this knowledge, then those were the toughest years of enslavement for him, because it made it even more difficult to have to live that type of life, knowing that this wasn't what he deserved. Without reading, the plantation owners could tell him anything, and that's all he knew of the world, and he had to accept that and digest that. But then when he was able to pick up a book and read it, then it opened up the truth for him, right? And this is the opportunity that we have with our young people today. And in some cases, we squander it. And we absolutely cannot do that. That is the number one thing that we have to keep in the forefront of our minds. We have the opportunity here to open minds and eyes to a different reality.
I love that. I love that. I especially naming like how he said like, it wasn't like after he was able to read, then like that by that point he was like, I can't do this anymore. Like this is for the birds. Like this is not for me. And it just makes me think of why that is so important for Black youth, youth of color, poor youth in this country to be given that opportunity as well to like read and learn. I always tell people like I feel like being Black in America is like being gaslit every day, because you're being told that, I mean, slavery was 400 years ago. It's, you know, it's not that big of a deal. Like, it's done. And, but it's like history says that, you know, the system that the country was, or the country itself, in like the way it's enacted, was through violence and genocide and slavery. And then through the creation of race, the creation of racism here in this country, of racial capitalism, and then to exist in this world every day, and to be and you know, we develop mental illness, we develop stresses because we're told like, no, you're fine, you're not slaves anymore. But then you start to read and you learn, and you don't feel as depressed, you don't feel as sad, you just feel this rage and like, I gotta get out. And so like, what if everybody could read? What if everybody had access to those books? What could we do? Like, imagine. I love that.
It's mind-blowing, actually. It's wonderful. And that's the vision. That's the goal. That definitely is the dream. For everybody to be able to be able to pick up a book and look at it and say, I didn't do anything wrong. This is not my fault. This shame is not mine to carry. You know? I'm a part of a system that wasn't created to help me get to where I'm going. I'm actually okay. It's the system that needs to be changed. That's the power in what we're doing. It's not just about decoding black marks on a page. This is a political act. This is 100% a political act.
Yeah, I think just about anything for Black youth is a political act, right? Anything for their care. We don't have too much, but there's one thing you also talk about. You add some stats in here in the beginning that I think are really important to talk about. You name people in prison, the number of people, I cannot remember it, and I thought I wrote it down. I thought I underlined it, but I guess I didn't. The number of people in prison who, what their reading level is like. Wow, I didn't even, did I mark the page? Oh, no, I did not. Wow, I'm so sorry. I wish I had actually marked the page. But you talk about, yeah. But you talk about how people in prison, a lot of times they don't have that. They don't have literacy. They don't have strong reading comprehension. And you say that at the root of the problem that we face, and in like your description of the book, from mass incarceration to income inequality, is an education system influenced by our nation's fraught history. So it's like, my question is, how do you, so you've got the youth that we're working on, what are, do you have you through your work learned on how to work with incarcerated people, or have you worked with incarcerated people, or youth of families from incarcerated people, and like what kind of support your work does for them, or that continuing, or I guess a better way to ask that would be, like, there's an organization in Chicago called Liberation Library, that provides books for and creates programs for children that are in juvenile detention centers, and which does like something similar to what you're doing. So like, for people that are doing that might be on this call, or that are interested in that, what advice would you give to them, and from like working with people that are like older and also struggling, and as an educator that worked in high school?
Yeah, okay. Very quickly, I'm looking at page 23 of the book, and it's a paragraph right in the middle where it says, when it comes to prisons, the economic impact of low literacy is even more alarming. Researchers at the Vera Institute for Justice found that in 2015, the average amount spent on each inmate in South Carolina was $20,053. In contrast, the state spent an average of $10,249 per year to educate a child in 2016. And so your question is, what advice do I have for people who are working with youth in the juvenile detention centers or incarcerated people? I definitely believe, going back to the title of the book, that literacy is one of the keys to keeping people out of the justice system in the first place. And then when we have those contacts with the justice system, liberation can come through reading as well. I think that what we have to keep in mind is, number one, again, know who the reader is, know the person before you start with any other work. Gather as much information as you can about the person that you want to reach, and then take what it is that you'd like to reach them with and tailor it to their needs and their interests. Please do not skip over that part. Don't assume that there's a profile of every one of the readers or the learners that you're about to work with. All of us are different, and that's the thing that's so beautiful. That's the thing that makes us unique. And just to be able to sit and listen just amplifies and emphasizes the value that we're placing on that particular work and on that person. And sometimes it opens the door for a greater understanding. Just people are more receptive when they know that first you care about them and then you care about whatever else you have to offer to them that you think might enrich their lives. That's my number one piece of advice.
I love that. Oh my gosh, because people definitely do not care. They just want to let me put my stuff on you. Let me just let's get to know people first. And I love that you do that with the kids. This has been fabulous. I've loved this very much. Thank you so much for joining Women and Children First and talking about this incredible book. I hope that people grab it again. Forever Free. It looks like this. If you come to the store, you'll see it. We are open for business right now. You'll see it on the events table next to our book groups, across from the register. If you do not want to come into the store because Delta, she is here and she is very loud right now, you can click the green button at the bottom of our videos that says buy the book, and you can purchase it directly from there. Otherwise, I guess, well, no, you listed all those books. You don't need to list them again, or you showed them again. I guess that's it for now. Anything that you want to share with us before we go? Oh, I do want to say this event is recorded. So if you want to watch it again, because Tracy obviously said some incredible things, you want to watch it again, you can pull it up on our YouTube. You can share it. Yeah, and that's it on that.
Ariel, I have to say that it's crazy that an hour went by. I just really enjoyed this conversation with you, the energy and the going back and forth. This was so much fun. It was such a pleasure, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the book and the opportunity to share with the audience here tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. This is so great. I love talking to Black women, and I love talking about working with people. And honestly, when I saw Radical Care, when I opened it, I was like, oh, this is for me. This is this is for me. This is what I talk about all day. People don't hear it. So again, thank you so much, Tracy Swinton Bailey, PhD, for talking about Forever Free with us and giving us just this incredible book to keep on our shelves. I hope that you all have a great day. Sending you love and light and energy and strength, because South Carolina sounds like it's on some mess right now. And sending love and strength to your family. All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so
We
much,
really
everybody.
appreciate it. Bye-bye.